The sharp, cruel sound of a hand striking a face echoed down the gleaming marble hallway of Pinnacle Tower. Angela Morgan staggered backward, her cheeks stinging and flushed red from the violent slap. Richard Carter, the building manager, loomed over her, his eyes cold and filled with disdain. His finger jabbed toward her face as he hissed the words that cut deeper than the blow itself. "Know your place, ape." The words dripped with venom, loud enough that every employee nearby froze, heads turning, but no one dared intervene. Angela, dressed in a faded janitor's uniform, clutching an old mop handle in one hand, remained perfectly still. Inside her, a lifetime of discipline kept her composed. No tremor betrayed the fire raging within her. She could have ended it right there. She could have said 3 simple words that would have reduced Richard Carter to a trembling wreck. "I own this." But Angela Morgan wasn't here for a single act of revenge. She was here for the truth. The full truth. And they had no idea who they were really dealing with. Just 48 hours earlier, Angela had stood in her penthouse apartment, overlooking the sparkling skyline of downtown Los Angeles. At 35, she was already one of the wealthiest women in America, a self-made billionaire who had risen from poverty through grit, intelligence, and relentless work. The world knew Angela Morgan as the visionary behind 3 wildly successful startups. What they didn't know was that she had just acquired Sterling Solutions, one of the largest commercial cleaning companies in the city. 15 buildings, 300 employees, and $50 million, 0 cents in annual revenue. The ink on the acquisition papers was barely dry when her CFO, Amanda Walsh, had raised concerns. "Angela, I have to be honest," Amanda said, sliding a file folder across Angela's polished marble desk. "We're receiving complaints from several sites. High turnover, allegations of harassment, discrimination." Angela's expression hardened. "What kind of allegations?" Amanda hesitated, then spoke plainly. "Racial discrimination. Hostile work environment. The Pinnacle Tower location seems to be at the center of it all." Angela closed the file, but didn't look down at it again. She didn't need papers to tell her what her instincts were already screaming. "Schedule the employee town hall for 2 weeks from now," she instructed Amanda. "In the meantime, I'm going undercover." Amanda's eyebrows shot up. "Undercover? As what?" Angela's answer was soft, but deadly serious. "As a janitor." That evening, in the privacy of her walk-in closet, Angela prepared her transformation. Off came the tailored suits worth thousands. She carefully removed her Cartier watch, her diamond earrings, her sleek designer pumps. In their place, second-hand jeans, an old t-shirt, scuffed sneakers from a thrift store. She tied her hair back tightly and replaced her subtle, expensive makeup with cheap drugstore foundation, applied just imperfectly enough to dull her sharp features. She stared at her reflection. Gone was the billionaire CEO. In her place was a tired, desperate woman named Vanessa Johnson, single mother, struggling to find work, invisible to the powerful. Angela knew exactly what she was doing. She knew how people like Richard Carter would see Vanessa, poor, desperate, and powerless. And that was exactly what she needed them to think. The next morning, Angela arrived at Pinnacle Tower at precisely 5:45 a.m. The building was a monument to corporate wealth. Glass walls, marble floors, steel elevators polished to a mirror shine. But behind that polished exterior, something darker was festering. Angela clutched her fake resume as she approached the HR office. The representative, Lisa Martinez, barely looked up. "Custodial work, right? Just so you know, we have high turnover in that department. Management can be demanding." Angela offered a meek smile, her voice soft and carefully tinged with desperation. "I really need this job. I can handle demanding." Lisa hesitated, then handed her a badge. "Report to Susan Blake tomorrow morning at 6 sharp. That brought Angela to now, her first morning on the job, standing in a dingy break room while Susan Blake, the floor supervisor, looked her over like a piece of spoiled meat. "Late already?" Susan snapped, even though Angela had arrived 10 minutes early. "Typical." Moments later, Richard Carter appeared. tall, broad-shouldered, with thinning gray hair and eyes that gleamed with quiet malice. He wasted no time. "We run a tight ship here," he declared, loud enough for all to hear. "No special treatment for your kind." Angela felt the heat rise to her face, but she kept her head down. "Your kind," he didn't even try to hide the racism. Then, without warning, he struck her. The slap was brutal, unexpected, public. The words followed immediately. "Know your place, ape." Angela caught the startled, guilty glances from the other workers nearby, Maria Torres, James Walker, and even young Emily Davis. She read the fear in their eyes. They had seen this before. None of them dared speak. Angela could feel the sting of the slap, still burning on her skin, but deeper than that was a familiar ache, the memory of every time she'd been underestimated, belittled, demeaned because of her skin color, her gender, or her background. But what Richard Carter didn't know was that this slap, this humiliation, was exactly what she had come for. It was confirmation that everything Amanda had warned her about was true, and perhaps far worse. Angela Morgan, billionaire CEO, was officially undercover. And the reckoning was just beginning. Angela Morgan, or rather Vanessa Johnson, kept her head down as she followed Susan Blake through the gleaming corridors of Pinnacle Tower. The sting from Richard Carter's slap still pulsed in her cheek, but she suppressed every instinct that demanded she reveal herself right there and then. This was not the time. This was not the place. She was here for evidence, not ego. Susan's voice snapped her back to the present. "Your locker's over there. Don't expect special treatment just because you're new." The pause before the word new was deliberate, a thinly veiled substitute for what Susan really meant. Angela recognized this game all too well. While Susan's clipped orders echoed through the janitorial break room, Angela quietly observed the dynamics between the workers. Maria Torres, a Latina woman with tired eyes, nodded politely but avoided eye contact. James Walker, a black man with a soldier's bearing but weary shoulders, offered a faint smile tinged with sadness. Emily Davis, a young white woman in her late 20s, gave Angela a hesitant glance. Not hostility, but fear. Fear of association. Angela knew that fear. It was the fear of being next. Her first assignment of the day wasn't cleaning the polished lobby or dusting the light fixtures. No. Susan pointed her toward the lowest, most unpleasant tasks. "We've got grease buildup in the kitchen vents, and the service bathrooms on 22 haven't been touched in a week." Susan's grin was sharp, her voice dripping with contempt. "Best to start where you belong." Angela bit the inside of her cheek. "Yes, ma'am," she murmured. While Angela was assigned the filthiest work, she watched as Susan gave Emily the lightest duties, organizing supply shelves, wiping down already clean surfaces, running minor errands. Even James and Maria, who clearly had seniority, received harsher tasks than Emily, and Angela could see it was no coincidence. The racial hierarchy was clear and deliberate. As Angela scrubbed the kitchen's grimy floors on her knees, she listened. She watched. She memorized every dismissive tone, every whispered slur Susan muttered under her breath when she thought no one could hear. "She'll never last," Susan scoffed to Richard Carter later that morning, not realizing Angela was standing just around the corner. "You know how they are. No work ethic, no discipline." "Not surprised," Richard replied. "But that's why we're here, to keep order. We know how to manage the riffraff." Riffraff. Angela felt a heat rise inside her that threatened to break her composure, but she held it in. Every word, every smirk, every cruelty, she stored them carefully, mentally cataloging the mounting evidence of systemic abuse. It wasn't just words. Actions spoke volumes. By noon, Angela noticed a pattern of unequal treatment that couldn't be ignored. Emily took 2 extended breaks before lunch, sipping lattes in the break room while scrolling on her phone. No one said a word. James was reprimanded sharply for taking a 5-minute breather after hauling heavy trash bags up 4 flights of stairs because the service elevator was coincidentally out of order that day. Maria quietly cleaned an entire office floor solo because Susan had forgotten to assign her a partner, and when Maria fell behind schedule, Susan berated her in front of the other staff. "And Angela?" Angela was given a mop and a bucket with filthy water and told to clean the freight elevator shaft alone, a task that should have required at least 2 workers for safety. "This is the job, sweetheart," Susan had smirked when Angela questioned the unsafe condition. "If you can't handle it, there's the door." During lunch, Angela sat in the corner of the break room, observing the small groups forming. Maria and James sat together but spoke little. Their silence wasn't companionship, it was shared exhaustion. Emily sat with Susan, laughing at something on Susan's phone, the supervisor's arm draped casually over the younger woman's shoulder like they were close friends, a bond that clearly granted Emily privileges. The segregation was stark. No wonder morale was so low. Angela made quiet conversation with Maria, careful not to blow her cover, but intent on learning more. "It's always like this?" she asked gently. Maria hesitated, glancing nervously at the cameras in the corners of the room and then at Susan, who was laughing loudly from across the table. "Worse," Maria whispered, barely moving her lips. "But you can't say anything. We need these jobs." James chimed in, his voice low and heavy. "Speak up and they'll find a reason to fire you by the end of the week. Or worse." Or worse. Angela had already seen glimpses of that worse. The slap this morning was not a one-off incident. It was part of a pattern of control, intimidation, and dehumanization. Later that afternoon, while cleaning the executive offices, Angela caught a glimpse of a memo on Richard Carter's desk, casually left in plain sight, almost as if mocking anyone who might read it. It was a list of names. Beside each name, a check mark or an X. Angela recognized some of the names as janitorial staff who were no longer employed at Pinnacle Tower. Next to her alias, Vanessa Johnson, there was already a scribbled note, "Watch closely, likely trouble." Likely trouble. She hadn't even finished her first shift. But that didn't scare Angela. It confirmed what she already suspected. As her first day drew to a close, Angela stood in the dimly lit janitorial closet, pretending to organize supplies while reviewing everything she had witnessed. She felt tired, not from scrubbing floors or cleaning bathrooms, but from the emotional weight of seeing systemic racism and cruelty play out in real time. Angela Morgan had fought her way to the top of America's corporate ladder, only to discover that at the bottom rung, nothing had changed. Richard Carter and Susan Blake believed they could abuse, degrade, and discard people like her without consequence. They didn't know that this time their target wasn't powerless. Angela knew she had only scratched the surface. But one thing was crystal clear. Beneath Pinnacle Tower's polished marble facade lay rot that ran deep. Tomorrow she would return. She would endure more. She would collect every piece of evidence. And when she was done, Richard and Susan's entire world would crumble. The investigation had only just begun. At precisely 6:00 a.m. on her second day, Angela Morgan, still cloaked in the identity of Vanessa Johnson, stepped through the back employee entrance of Pinnacle Tower. The early morning chill was nothing compared to the cold hostility waiting for her inside. Susan Blake stood near the time clock, arms crossed, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Cutting it close already?" Susan sneered, tapping her wristwatch dramatically. Angela showed no reaction. She was 10 minutes early, but it didn't matter. In Susan's mind, she was guilty before she even arrived. "Just remember," Susan continued, loud enough for Maria and James to overhear, "we don't tolerate laziness here, no matter what your background." Angela forced herself to nod humbly. She was documenting it all, each subtle dig, each veiled slur disguised as management discipline. That day, the assignments became harsher. While Emily was asked to supervise supply counts, essentially an excuse to scroll on her phone in the break room, Angela was ordered to clean the lower parking garage, a dank, oil-stained cavern where pigeons nested in the rafters and where Susan had forgotten to provide proper ventilation masks. "You'll be fine," Susan had muttered dismissively when Angela asked about protective gear. "Your people are used to tougher conditions, aren't they?" Angela's stomach twisted. The cruelty wasn't even subtle anymore. Richard Carter soon made his rounds, stepping deliberately into Angela's path near the freight elevator. "Slow as molasses," he barked. "It's in your DNA, I guess." Angela met his gaze only briefly, careful to keep her expression unreadable, though her fists tightened instinctively at her sides. During break time, Angela noticed something else, a pattern in how Susan monitored breaks. James was ordered back to work 5 minutes early. Maria's request for a bathroom break was denied altogether. Emily took a 20-minute coffee run, laughing with Susan on the way out. This wasn't just favoritism, it was systemic control. Even in moments of rest, the hierarchy was rigid and oppressive. Angela gently approached Maria, offering her half of a granola bar she had brought. "How long has this been going on?" she asked softly. Maria glanced around nervously before whispering, "Since before I started. Richard, and Susan have always been like this. People come and go, but they stay in charge." "Why doesn't anyone report it?" Maria shook her head sadly. "To who? HR won't help. They're scared of Richard. And the rest of us? We need these jobs." James chimed in quietly. "They make examples of people, fire them for no reason, accuse them of stealing, and once you've got that on your record, no one else will hire you." Angela felt a surge of admiration for Maria and James, despite the abuse they endured, holding on because they had no other choice. But she did. And soon they would too. By the end of the week, the psychological harassment was escalating. Angela was given impossible workloads and impossible deadlines. 3 floors cleaned before lunch or you're out, Susan threatened one morning. It was a task that would take 2 experienced workers at least a full shift, and Susan knew it. Richard delighted in undermining Angela publicly. "Why are you so slow?" he barked, standing over her as she scrubbed grime from bathroom tiles. "Jennifer could do this in half the time." Jennifer, the same Emily who sat drinking coffee during most of her shift. The message was clear: Angela was being set up to fail. And the rest of the staff watched helplessly, fearful that if they intervened, they would be next. By Friday, Angela was exhausted, physically and emotionally. She had collected pages of mental notes on work assignments, break monitoring, slurs, humiliating tasks, but she also needed to understand why morale was so broken. So she stayed late, volunteering to clean the executive offices after hours. That's when she noticed something that stopped her cold. In Susan Blake's office, hanging on the wall, was a framed list of top performers, but every name on the list was white. There wasn't a single person of color listed, despite the obvious hard work she had witnessed from Maria, James, and others. And then, pinned discreetly behind Susan's monitor, Angela spotted a handwritten sign. "They should feel lucky to even have these jobs." Those words confirmed what Angela already knew. This wasn't unconscious bias. This was deliberate, institutionalized racism disguised as high standards. That evening, as she was preparing to leave, Richard cornered her near the freight elevator. "Vanessa," he began, pretending civility, "we need to talk." Angela froze. "Some people here think you might not last. I can't have troublemakers. Understand?" His voice lowered into a threat. "People like you always push the limits." "I'm just doing my job," Angela replied carefully. Richard stepped closer, so close she could smell the cigar smoke on his breath. "Let me make this clear. Around here, you're disposable. I don't care what sob story you brought in with you. You mess up once, just once, and you're gone. You don't belong here." Angela met his gaze, letting him think he had intimidated her. But inside, she felt something else entirely. Determination. At home that night, she sat in her high-rise penthouse and documented every interaction in detail. The contrast between her luxurious life and the dehumanizing treatment she endured by day felt surreal. But this wasn't just about her. It was about Maria, about James, about every employee trapped in this toxic environment. Tomorrow, she would return. And the deeper she went, the clearer it became. Pinnacle Tower wasn't just broken. It was poisoned from the top down. The rot went far beyond Richard Carter's casual racism or Susan Blake's cruelty. It was cultural, systemic, and Angela Morgan was going to dismantle it, brick by brick. Angela Morgan arrived early again the next morning, but it didn't matter. Richard Carter was waiting for her at the entrance, arms crossed, a cruel smile already curling his lips. "Typical," he sneered before she even swiped her badge. No respect for punctuality, no respect for rules. Angela glanced at the clock. She was 5 minutes early. Actually, she started, but Richard cut her off with a raised hand. You people always have excuses, he snapped, loud enough for Maria and James to overhear as they entered behind her. Both averted their eyes, accustomed to these scenes. This was different today, though. The tension in Richard's body was coiled tighter than usual, his anger just below the surface, as if he was waiting, looking, for an excuse. And Susan Blake stood just a few steps away, watching silently, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. The abuse escalated quickly. By mid-morning, Susan deliberately spilled a bucket of dirty water in front of Angela's mop cart and barked, "Clean it properly this time, Vanessa, or maybe this is too much for you to handle." While Angela was on her knees scrubbing, Richard loomed over her, a smirk on his face as he muttered so only she could hear, "Crawling on the floor suits you, it's in your blood after all." Every insult was calculated, every task assigned designed to humiliate. During her break, which Susan cut short by 10 minutes, Angela overheard something chilling. Standing outside Richard's office while wiping down the glass doors, she heard him on the phone. "Yeah," he said casually, "I've got one new hire who's already showing attitude. You know how they are, always late, lazy, entitled. She won't last a week. I give her until tomorrow before we find something." Find something. Angela didn't need clarification. That meant they were preparing to fabricate a reason to fire her. Or worse. That afternoon, Susan made her clean a storage closet filled with industrial chemicals. Angela noticed the ventilation was inadequate. It was hot, airless, and smelled overwhelmingly of ammonia. She worked carefully but kept glancing toward the door. After about 20 minutes, Susan appeared, and without a word shoved Angela hard into the closet. Before Angela could react, the heavy door slammed shut. She heard the lock click. Complete darkness. The suffocating heat pressed in on her from all sides, the acrid scent of chemicals burning her throat. Then, through the thin door, she heard Richard's voice. "Let her sit in there for a while, maybe this'll teach her some discipline." And Susan's quiet laugh, "Or break her." Angela sat on the floor, forcing herself to breathe evenly despite the rising panic. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was psychological warfare. When they finally let her out, nearly an hour later, she emerged drenched in sweat, lightheaded but outwardly calm. Maria had clearly tried to help but had been warned off. "Stay out of it," Susan had snapped at her earlier, "unless you want to join her." Angela locked eyes with Maria briefly, silently communicating gratitude and reassurance. She would not let this stand. But Richard wasn't done. At the end of the shift, he approached Angela with a theatrical flourish, reaching into her cleaning cart and pulling out 2 expensive office supplies, a branded stapler and a shrink-wrapped pack of printer toner. "Well, well," he announced loudly, ensuring every nearby worker heard him. "What's this doing in your cart, Vanessa?" Susan appeared instantly, her arms crossed, an expression of exaggerated disappointment on her face. "Stealing from the company already?" she said, shaking her head. Angela stared at the items. She hadn't touched them. This was staged, and poorly at that. But it didn't matter. Richard was already calling building security. "I knew you were trouble from day one," he declared, loud and proud. "This confirms it." Angela remained calm. Inside, she was seething. But outwardly, she was still Vanessa Johnson, quiet, powerless, vulnerable. Burnout. That evening, as she sat in her penthouse and documented every cruel act, every fabricated accusation, every racist slur, she realized something even more dangerous was emerging. This wasn't just workplace harassment. Richard and Susan were running a deliberate campaign of psychological terror, and it was all about control. Control through fear. Control through humiliation. Control through isolation. But what they didn't realize was that Angela Morgan had endured far worse to get where she was. And she was almost ready to strike. Almost. Before bed, she called Ethan Brooks, her trusted lawyer. "Prepare everything," she instructed quietly. "I want the introduction meeting moved up, soon." "Understood," Ethan replied. "How soon?" "As soon as possible," Angela said, her voice hard. I'm nearly finished collecting what I need. But tomorrow we push them even further. Let's see how deep this rot goes. In the shadows of the Pinnacle Tower, Richard Carter and Susan Blake believed they were tightening their grip on an employee who had no recourse. But they were tightening a noose around their own necks. Angela's patience was almost at an end. And they were about to discover the devastating cost of underestimating the wrong woman. It was late Friday evening when Angela Morgan made her most chilling discovery yet. After another brutal day, more insults, more impossible assignments, another degrading locker search, Angela volunteered for one last task, organizing the dusty supply room in the basement, far from prying eyes. But as she quietly stacked boxes along the back wall, she caught sight of a familiar figure slipping into the room. Susan Blake. Moments later, Richard Carter appeared, glancing nervously over his shoulder. The two moved with practiced ease, speaking in hushed tones. Angela ducked behind a stack of janitorial carts, holding her breath. "Let's move fast," Susan whispered. "The new owner's coming soon. We have to clear this stuff out before anyone notices." Richard laughed under his breath. "These idiots never pay attention to inventory anyway. They're too busy worrying about lawsuits and HR complaints." Angela's eyes narrowed as she watched them load sealed boxes into an industrial cart. When Susan opened one box, Angela's heart skipped a beat. Inside were expensive electronics. Laptops, tablets, wireless routers. Not old or discarded models, but brand new, still shrink-wrapped. Another box contained industrial cleaning supplies, high-end power tools, and even unopened office equipment. "That's another $5,000 right there," Susan said, nodding approvingly. "We can flip this online by Monday." "We've been doing this for years," Richard gloated. "These corporate types never check the supply logs. And with turnover so high, no one questions a missing pallet here or there." Angela's blood ran cold. This wasn't petty theft. This was a systematic embezzlement operation, a full-scale, organized scheme to steal thousands in company property and funnel it for personal profit. And it explained everything. The abuse, the harassment, the targeting of employees like Maria, James, and Angela herself. Anyone who might question management's behavior, anyone who might get close enough to notice discrepancies, was driven out or crushed under fabricated accusations. Angela realized this wasn't just about racism and cruelty. It was about covering up a crime. Suddenly, Susan froze. "Wait, did you hear that?" she whispered. Angela's pulse spiked as Susan's eyes swept the room, narrowing at the shadows near the cleaning carts. "Check over there," Richard ordered, his voice low and dangerous. Angela knew she couldn't let them catch her now. If they suspected what she had seen, what she knew, she wouldn't simply be harassed anymore. He might not walk out of that room at all. Quietly, carefully, she edged toward the emergency exit, keeping herself low and hidden behind stacked pallets of paper towels. Richard's footsteps echoed just feet from where she crouched. "If anyone's back here snooping," he began, leaving the threat unfinished. Angela waited until his back was turned, then slipped silently through the exit. Once outside, she didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, the same unassuming flip phone she used as Vanessa Johnson, and dialed a number she had memorized long ago. "Ethan," she said as soon as her lawyer answered. "It's time." "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, his voice instantly alert. "No," Angela replied calmly. "And that's why we can't wait any longer. Schedule the company-wide introduction meeting for 9 a.m. Monday, and tell building security I want the supply room locked and sealed tonight." "Understood," Ethan said. "Anything else?" Angela's voice hardened. "Yes. Alert the FBI's white-collar crimes unit. Tell them we've uncovered theft, fraud, and conspiracy. And I have names." As she hung up, Angela felt a surge of resolve. Richard Carter and Susan Blake thought they were untouchable, that they could hide their crimes behind discrimination, intimidation, and abuse. They believed they could break anyone who threatened their operation. They had no idea their latest target was the owner of the company. Angela knew their next move. They would escalate. They would try to discredit her completely, maybe even call the police and fabricate a violent confrontation to have her removed for good. But now, she was ready. That night, as Richard and Susan sat in Susan's office finalizing their inventory of stolen goods, they gloated over their apparent success. "She won't last another day," Richard said with confidence. "Tomorrow we call security and the police. We say she threatened us. That'll be the end of her." Susan laughed. "Perfect. The police will believe us over some janitor any day." "Especially her," Richard added with a cruel grin. Angela, from a distance, listened to their final plot unfold. They had written the last chapter of their careers without realizing it. At dawn, Angela prepared for what she knew would be her last day undercover. She packed carefully, no designer clothes, no jewelry, no signs of her true identity. But this time, she carried something far more powerful than appearances. She carried the truth. And she was going to reveal it in a way Richard Carter and Susan Blake would never forget. The trap they had laid for her would become their undoing. The evidence of harassment, theft, and corruption was in place. Witnesses were ready. Security footage had been pulled. The FBI was watching. On Monday morning, they would discover that the woman they had spent 2 weeks degrading, humiliating, and abusing was not some powerless employee. She was Angela Morgan, their boss. And their reckoning had arrived. The next morning, Angela Morgan walked into Pinnacle Tower precisely at 8:55 a.m. The employee entrance, where she had endured insults and humiliation, was eerily quiet. The atmosphere inside felt strange, tense, expectant. Richard Carter and Susan Blake were already in motion. Angela watched them from across the marble lobby, calm and collected in her janitor's uniform, mop in hand. Richard's eyes flashed as he whispered something to Susan, then raised his voice dramatically. "Help! Somebody help! She attacked me!" His performance was absurd but practiced. He disheveled his own hair, tipped over a trash bin, and scratched his arm for effect. Susan followed instantly, pulling out her phone and calling 911. "We have an aggressive black woman threatening management," she said breathlessly, emphasizing every word to craft a narrative designed to manipulate the authorities. "We fear for our lives." Angela stood still as employees gathered around, confused, worried, some even horrified at what they thought they were witnessing. Moments later, 2 police officers arrived, Officer Ramirez and Officer Bennett. Their eyes scanned the scene, a well-dressed white manager clutching his injured arm, a trembling supervisor at his side, and a black woman in a janitor's uniform standing quietly nearby. Their assumptions were immediate. "Ma'am, step forward and put your hands where we can see them," Officer Bennett commanded. Angela kept her posture neutral. "Officers," Richard interjected quickly, "she's dangerous. We've had problems with her all week. She just snapped and attacked us." Susan nodded vigorously. "We're afraid for our safety." Maria Torres and James Walker stood nearby, horrified but silent, just as Richard and Susan had conditioned them to be. Even Emily Davis looked pale, conflicted, caught between what she had seen and what was being said. The officers approached Angela, handcuffs ready. "Wait," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Before you arrest me, there's someone you need to talk to." At that exact moment, the front doors to Pinnacle Tower swung open and Ethan Brooks stepped inside. Dressed in a sharp suit, briefcase in hand, Ethan carried himself with quiet authority. "Officers," he said smoothly, flashing his credentials, "I represent Ms. Morgan here. Before you proceed with this arrest, I strongly suggest you review the building's security footage from this morning and the last 2 weeks." Richard paled instantly. "This isn't necessary," he blurted out. "She's violent. We're protecting the staff." Susan tried to chime in, but Ethan held up a hand. "I think you'll find that this narrative does not hold up under scrutiny." The officers hesitated. Officer Ramirez nodded toward building security. "Let's see the footage." 20 minutes later, the officer's demeanor had shifted entirely. The footage showed Richard staging the scene, scratching his own arm, tipping over trash bins, gesturing theatrically. Other clips revealed Susan whispering directions, their plot unfolding with precision. The footage didn't lie. Their fabricated assault charges unraveled before everyone's eyes. And then came the footage of Susan locking Angela in a supply closet for nearly an hour, of Richard slapping her on her first day, of constant verbal abuse. Maria and Jane stood frozen, witnessing the entire truth play out on the monitors. The police removed the handcuffs from Angela's wrists gently. "I apologize, ma'am," Officer Ramirez said quietly. But Angela was no longer focused on them. Her attention turned to Richard Carter and Susan Blake, who stood wide-eyed as realization dawned. Their lies had failed. Their plan had backfired. Their world was about to collapse. "We'll deal with you two shortly," Ethan told them with cool authority. Then, in a move that caught everyone off guard, Ethan tapped the building's PA system. "Attention all employees," he announced. "Please report immediately to the 20th floor conference room for an urgent company meeting." Richard's face twisted with panic. "No, you can't!" But it was too late. The trap was set. The players were assembled. And Angela Morgan, who had endured every cruelty in silence, was ready to step into the light. As the employees filed into the large conference room, whispering anxiously, Richard and Susan sat stiffly near the front, still clinging to some hope they could spin their way out of the disaster. At 9:05 a.m., Ethan stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, projecting his voice so everyone could hear, "it is my pleasure to introduce your new owner, Angela Morgan." Gasps filled the room. Every employee turned as Angela stepped through the doors, not as Vanessa Johnson, the janitor, but as Angela Morgan, the billionaire CEO. Gone was the faded uniform. In its place, a tailored navy blue suit, crisp white blouse, subtle pearl earrings. Her hair was immaculate, her posture commanding. The transformation was complete and undeniable. Richard Carter's jaw fell open. "That's impossible," he muttered. "That can't be her." Susan's face drained of color. Maria and James exchanged wide-eyed glances, shock but also relief and awe. Even Emily Davis let out an audible gasp. Angela paused at the front of the room, letting the moment settle, letting the weight of recognition and realization sink into every mind present. "Good morning," she said at last, her voice cool, precise, measured. "I've spent the last 2 weeks working beside you. I've seen how this company operates when management thinks no one important is watching." Her gaze locked onto Richard, then Susan. "Unfortunately for them, I was watching." The silence in the room was absolute. "Richard Carter, Susan Blake," Angela continued, "effective immediately, you are both terminated." Richard jumped up, his face contorted with fury. "You can't fire me. This is discrimination. This is illegal." Angela's smile was ice-cold. "No, Richard," she replied evenly. "What's illegal is workplace harassment, racial discrimination, false imprisonment, filing false police reports, and embezzling company property." As if on cue, 2 uniformed detectives stepped into the room, followed by 2 FBI agents in dark suits. "Richard Carter, Susan Blake," the lead detective announced. "You are under arrest for theft, conspiracy, fraud, assault, and filing false police reports." Handcuffs gleamed in the bright fluorescent lights as they clicked around Richard and Susan's wrists. Angela stood perfectly still as they were led away, her expression unreadable. But inside, she felt something deeper than satisfaction. Justice. Hard-earned. Hard-won. At last. The conference room remained hushed even after the heavy doors closed behind Richard Carter and Susan Blake, now in handcuffs, flanked by detectives and FBI agents. Their departure felt like an exorcism, the removal of a poison that had festered silently for years. Angela Morgan, standing at the head of the table, surveyed the stunned faces before her. Maria Torres sat motionless, tears welling in her tired eyes. James Walker held his head high for the first time in weeks, the defeat that once weighed on his shoulders finally lifting. Emily Davis sat frozen, her face a mixture of shock, shame, and dawning respect. Angela let the silence stretch, allowing every employee to absorb what they had just witnessed. Then she spoke, her voice calm, unwavering, but heavy with meaning. "You all know me as Vanessa Johnson," she began, her gaze sweeping the room. But that was only part of the truth. Her words were measured, deliberate. My name is Angela Morgan. I am the new owner and CEO of Sterling Solutions, and as of today, everything changes. A ripple of gasps spread through the room as the reality settled in. For the past 2 weeks, she continued, I worked alongside you. I scrubbed floors, cleaned bathrooms, hauled trash, and endured much more. Her gaze hardened. I was insulted, humiliated, slapped, locked in closets, falsely accused of theft, and nearly arrested, all by the very people entrusted to manage this company. Her words hung in the air, exposing the full extent of the rot that had infected Pinnacle Tower. And while that experience was painful, it was also clarifying, Angela added. Because I saw this workplace for what it truly is, a culture of fear, inequality, and exploitation, fostered by leaders who believed they were untouchable. She took a slow breath. That era's over. Angela stepped closer to the long table where the remaining employees sat. Maria Torres, she said gently. Maria looked up, startled to hear her name. You showed kindness even when you were afraid, Angela said, her voice softening. Effective immediately, you are promoted to floor supervisor. Your salary is increased to $75,000 with full benefits, family leave, and profit-sharing eligibility. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, her tears spilling freely now. James Walker, Angela continued. James straightened, his chest rising. You endured indignities with quiet strength, Angela said. As of today, you are promoted to assistant facilities manager. Your new salary, $85,000, plus a signing bonus and additional veteran benefits. A stunned silence followed as James nodded, overcome but proud. Then Angela turned to Emily Davis. Emily flinched, visibly uncomfortable. Emily, Angela said, her voice not unkind but direct, you were complicit through silence. But I believe people can change. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Effective immediately, you are appointed as our new HR director, Angela announced. A collective murmur swept the room. Your mission will be to rebuild this department from the ground up with a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment of any kind. You will also receive company sponsorship for your MBA so you can perform this role at the highest level. Emily's lip trembled as she whispered, Thank you. I won't let you down. Angela nodded once. I know. Then Angela addressed the entire room. Everyone here, she said, deserves better, and starting today you'll get it. Her voice rose, gaining momentum, conviction flowing through every word. Effective immediately, all employees at this location will receive a 40% pay raise, full health, dental, and vision coverage, paid vacation, sick leave, and family leave. We are instituting profit sharing, so when this company succeeds, you succeed. Gasps gave way to applause, applause gave way to cheers. But Angela wasn't finished. We are also launching a worker advocacy committee empowered to investigate grievances independently. We are bringing in external auditors to review all management practices. And we are creating a whistleblower protection program so no employee ever has to suffer in silence again. Her gaze swept the room one last time. You deserve dignity. You deserve respect. And you will get it, not because it's charity, but because it's your right. The applause swelled again, louder this time, genuine and full-throated. For the first time, many employees felt hope. As the cheers died down, Angela added one final promise. For any former employee forced out under Richard and Susan's regime, we're creating a compensation fund. If you suffered financial hardship, we will make it right. Maria wiped her cheeks, overwhelmed. James nodded solemnly. Even Emily sat straighter, committed. The room felt transformed, not by opulence or grandeur, but by an atmosphere of respect, accountability, and fairness. Angela allowed herself a small smile, not of triumph, but of satisfaction. Justice had not just been served, it had been institutionalized. As the meeting adjourned, employees lingered, many approaching Angela personally. Thank you, Maria whispered, clutching Angela's hand tightly, for everything, for seeing us. It's just the beginning, Angela replied quietly. And she meant it. Outside the conference room, a television monitor played muted coverage of the FBI agents leading Richard Carter and Susan Blake away in handcuffs. Their mugshots flashed briefly on screen. a final, fitting image of the downfall they had engineered themselves. But inside Pinnacle Tower, hope was taking root. And Angela Morgan, CEO, leader, survivor, had planted it herself. 6 months later, Pinnacle Tower was unrecognizable, not in its architecture but in its spirit. What was once a cold, hostile workplace had become a model of respect and equity. Angela Morgan's reforms had not only taken root but flourished. The worker advocacy committee she established met monthly and reviewed every complaint with care and independence. Anonymous reporting systems allowed employees to speak up without fear. Diversity and inclusion training became part of onboarding. And it wasn't performative, it was transformative. Employee satisfaction surveys revealed staggering changes. Morale had soared to the highest levels in company history. Turnover had dropped to nearly zero. Productivity was up 60%. More importantly, dignity had been restored. Angela didn't merely delegate this transformation, she embodied it. It was not uncommon to see her in the halls greeting employees by name, sitting beside them during lunch, or even rolling up her sleeves and helping clean when staffing was tight. But this time, no one questioned her presence. No one underestimated her. She wasn't undercover anymore. She was simply present, a leader who understood that leadership was about service. One afternoon, Angela walked through the very hallway where Richard Carter had slapped her just months earlier, the slap that had ignited this entire journey. The marble floors gleamed just as before, but now they reflected more than light. They reflected a culture of fairness. As she paused, Maria Torres approached her, beaming. "Miss Morgan," Maria said softly, her voice catching with emotion. "I wanted to tell you something." Angela smiled warmly. "What is it, Maria?" "My daughter," Maria whispered. "She just got accepted into college, full tuition, and I can afford to send her." Had felt a swell of pride, not for herself, but for Maria, for James, for every employee who now thrived under the protection of dignity and fairness. "You didn't just change this job for us," Maria added, wiping her eyes. "You changed our futures." Angela placed a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. "That's why we're here," she said simply. "That's why this matters." Angela's story had spread far beyond Pinnacle Tower. The media had covered every chapter, from the slap to the arrests to the sweeping reforms. News anchors praised her courage. Business journals heralded her approach as a revolutionary case study in leadership. She had been invited to speak before Congress on workplace equity and testify about the abuses she uncovered. Universities called her to keynote commencements, asking her to inspire the next generation of leaders. But Angela remained grounded. When asked in interviews why she had done it, why she went undercover when she could have simply walked in as the new owner, her answer was always the same. You can't fix what you don't understand, and you can't understand what you haven't lived. Her undercover experience hadn't just exposed individual bad actors. It had revealed how structures of power enable cruelty when left unchecked. "I had to feel it," she would say. "Not from the top of a boardroom, but from the bottom rung." That's where the truth lives. The contrast between her journey and Richard Carter and Susan Blake's fate couldn't have been starker. They were both now serving federal prison sentences, 5 years each for theft, fraud, conspiracy, and filing false police reports. Their mugshots had become viral symbols of workplace racism's downfall. Their names would forever be associated not with management expertise, but with shameful abuse of power. Angela never gloated. That wasn't her style. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring that what happened under their rule could never happen again. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the downtown skyline, casting long shadows across Pinnacle Tower's glass facade, Angela paused in her office, looking out over the city. She thought about every janitor, every invisible worker she had met, not just at Pinnacle, but everywhere. Their stories mattered. Their dignity mattered. And she had a responsibility far beyond this building. As she turned off her office light and headed for the elevator, a new janitor was mopping the marble floor near the exit. He smiled shyly at her. "Good night, Miss Morgan," he said. Angela returned the smile warmly. "Good night." she replied, meaning every word. And as she stepped into the elevator, she felt a quiet, profound peace. Justice hadn't just visited Pinnacle Tower. It lived there now. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not punishment. It's creating a world where no one else has to endure what you did. Sometimes dignity begins not at the top, but from the ground up. And sometimes justice looks exactly like a black woman in an expensive suit walking through a building where every worker is finally treated with respect.